Hi. Hey guys. Thanks for being here. Hi guys.
Hey guys, thanks for being here.
Hey.
This is Justin.
Yeah, that is JIT.
I was about to read all my questions from a little tiny phone, but this is going to be way better. Thanks everybody for being here. I think you guys are going to love this Fireside Chat. Zach and I actually just met yesterday, so that was a last minute addition with a last minute printout. Just FYI, I'm Alex, as everybody just saw. I run a company called Shockoe. We build mobile apps, immersive experiences, and conversational AI for some of the largest brands in the world. And as I mentioned, I'm really excited to have this conversation with Zach. He is the most important person here.
Oh, come on now, don't say that.
And I wanted to start with something really, really cool. So Zach and I met, and I was like, so what do you want to talk about? And he's like, well, when I was born. And I'm like, we have 15 minutes. But I was told we have 4 hours till dinner, so maybe we can start. Normally I start with the end in mind, but I think it's appropriate to start when you were born. So tell us about your story.
I don't think, and you're very kind, and it was a pleasure to meet you too, and all you do is fascinating. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Brand Innovators for holding this forum. I still don't know how you do it, but it's amazing. I don't know that my story is that interesting or worthwhile, but I am a little bit of a hobbit in Mordor. My career can probably be summarized from that line of Lord of the Rings, where and then something happened the ring didn't expect. I'm sort of an alien. I was born to two world-class hippie artists that, maybe 6 blocks from here at the Art Institute of Chicago, graduated with their master's degree in art education. And that was my mom and my dad, and they got into the spirit of the 60s. They were part of the Imagist movement that was, Chicago famous, and dropped some acid and joined some cults and did the things that made the 60s. And then they had 2 kids, and that was me and my sister. And so when we taught, a lot of the industry narrative is around creativity, and you sort of can't escape that. And I don't know, it was like our religion. It was like our lifeblood when I was growing up. We were always in the studio. It was always like clay or welding equipment that a 6-year-old probably shouldn't be around, or broken glass or something. And that was just the lens through which we viewed our upbringing. So to have been a studio artist and a child of studio artists, and I myself am an artist too, and to have entered the world of commerce through, only Kramer from Seinfeld could have imagined such a bizarre series of events that would have led me here, has been a trip, and a good trip though, I think. And as long as I approach my work with reverence and respect for what the people in these corporations that I work with know and do, and where their wisdom lies, and where my wisdom lies, I think there's been a great reciprocity. So it's just a trip. So I'm sort of an outlier, but it's been really fun.
We're talking about your growth, not the acid now, right? So I
Different panel.
Yeah, different panel. That's some nice colors. One of the things that was really cool is I saw Zach's living room. I think it was your living room, right?
Yep.
And I mean, it was just an explosion of art. Or what seemed to be an explosion of art, which was really, really cool. So I could just picture you growing up with 2 artists, and every project becomes art, which then becomes an experience, which then becomes a learning event.
Totally. Yeah. And they weren't just artists. Although they are artists, but they were art educators. So, which brings us, I think, back to what we're talking about, which is unleashing creativity, or in this case, summoning and harnessing creativity. And so, because they were art educators, that was their job. That was primarily
a teacher, right?
My dad was a teacher in New Trier High School here for 35 years. He taught art. You had to now.
No, we don't.
And he was an eccentric. This is not, just exactly.
There we go. I think Zach's going to be around for happy hour, so maybe you guys can talk about that. So provocation and teaching, right? So let's come back to the topic here. So your dad was a teacher, right? Talk to us about some of his teaching style. How did he provoke his students to actually think creatively?
What I remember about my dad's teaching, because when I was younger, I'd go hang out, and they were, oh my God, seniors in high school, and then as I got to be in high school, I'd hang out too. So, and then as I graduated, I'd go back and watch him. It wasn't like ethnography, but I definitely watched my father in his element a number of times, and there was one behavior that he always exhibited that seemed to be his go-to, and it was he worked in clay quite a bit because that was the material of students and ceramics and whatnot. And there'd be a student that was stuck or couldn't get through, I just can't quite get there, I can't see it. I understand the assignment, you want me to sculpt this thing and then you want me to take it apart and sculpt it with melting or whatever the assignment was, whatever the method he was employing to get them to think, and they'd be stuck. And he'd come around to their table and he, in the matter of like 120 seconds, he would shape at least 4 or 5 different ways that they could approach what they were thinking about. And then he'd smash it all back down. And there wasn't, it's not like he used frameworks or mental models, he just was generative. And around him you could almost see he was creating a space where they too could be generative. And you saw what he was doing. At some level later in life, I saw what he was doing. He was holding a creative space that would allow them to access their creative space. So it wasn't so much that he was teaching them something or giving them something. If anything, it was addition by subtraction, if anything. And he was removing the obstacles because he knew that inherent in them was the 4-year-old that was incredibly imaginative and incredibly generative and incredibly lateral and nonlinear, but conditioning, which we're all a part of, you can look around and see it, was making them more linear, logical, rational, and sequential. And that his job was to remove that. And if you don't see the parallel between that and what we do in organizations, you're missing the beat, because I think that's the game, that's the predicament. Is that in many ways, marketers and business people have been hired for their logical, linear, sequential acumen. And those skills rock when you're running operations and administration, and you're balancing a P&L, and you're doing the stuff that you have to do to keep the infrastructure of business flowing. Then you get into a meeting where you have to evaluate creative, or drive front-end innovation, or think laterally, and all of a sudden those muscles are atrophied. They're just not as strong. So I try to apply the same principle that he applied, which was being generative. But I mean, there's a whole host of we do use frameworks and models, there's all sorts of tricks in the bag, but fundamentally being generative and unlocking people, I think, is what I saw him do and what at least the aesthetic that I try to approach my work with.
This is awesome. So yeah, we'll go to frameworks in just a second, but let's see if we could tie these 3 topics together, right? So fast forward a few years, right? Things you learned from your dad as a teacher. And now you have careers at GSK, I believe, right? Mondelez and Haleon.
I grew up at ad agencies, and then I did a little time at design firms like IDEO and Ziba. Somehow I passed the drug test, and they allowed me over to the client side. I can say I'm sober 8 years now, so I'm allowed to make that joke. Thank you very much. Keep coming back. I'm just finishing 13 years on the client side, 7 years at Mondelez and 5 years at Haleon, which was GSK.
That's awesome. And so coming back to that, as an agency owner and as marketers, we are challenged to provoke both our clients and our team to think about these ideas.
Of course.
What are some of the lessons that you took away from your dad that actually allowed you to do that with the teams that you led?
Well, there was a limitation to how far I could there was a limitation to how far I could take what I learned from my father into the corporate world, because he's operating in such a different space. So at the principle level, what I just shared was maybe the most valuable thing. Being generative, understanding that it's addition by subtraction, and most importantly, if you're expecting to help liberate, I mean, to me, that's the big. We call it harnessing creativity here, but just if we were in a brand strategy thing, we were wordsmithing, I would actually call it liberating, because harnessing makes it sound like it's already there. You just got to gather it. It is already there, but it's not a problem of gathering it. I think it's a problem of liberating it. There's one of the best books written about it. Forgive me, I'm neurodivergent. There's no doubt about it to some degree. One of the best books written about it is Ed Catmull's Creativity, Inc. Very aptly called Creativity, Inc. He was the founder of Pixar and, arguably carried the torch further than many in a corporate setting. It's called Creativity, Inc., the invisible obstacles that block our creativity. So if the obstacles are invisible and you buy into that narrative, then you know you're working in the space of invisible. You know you're working in the unseen. And so that's maybe the most profound lesson I took from my father was, you're in the liberation business. So you yourself have to be liberated. That means that any method that you are tuning into, whether it's a framework, a process, principles, approaches, even design thinking. I mean, I worked at IDEO, I drank just enough Kool-Aid at that organization to realize they drank their own Kool-Aid. And then anything they approach, well, it has to be design thinking, it has to be, does it? Because now you're drinking, right? So that's not liberation if you're just applying the same. So methods are a trap, and they're wonderful until they become a trap. You have to remain liberated yourself. And so maybe that's the most important thing I took from my father, to remain forever liberated. In fact, like one last thing I'll say about him. Who doesn't want to talk about their dad? His forte, because he's a pedigreed artist from Art Institute of Chicago, right? But his forte was folk art, intuitive art, and art brut. Which, if you know anything about the art world, which I don't, I should know more, but I don't. Those are unpedigreed practices, where artists in art brut and folk art and outsider art, they approach without pedigree. They have no clue what they're doing. And what they create is beautiful, and artists love it because they go, oh yeah, I had forgotten how to be so, free, right? And so that's the spirit that I think you're trying to bring, to the degree that you can, into these, monolithic, multi-matrix organizations.
So bear with me here, but we're going to trap the freedom for just a second. Frameworks, right? We're talking about methods and strategies, right? And I think all of us have used a framework once or twice in the last 24 hours, right? It's like, let's apply this framework to this problem. Let's figure out how to think creatively by boxing ourselves into a framework. You and I talked about this, right? So what are some of the frameworks that you have used over the last 2 or 3 years at Haleon that really worked? And what are some of the challenges? Let's not go into like the actual framework challenge that we're going to talk about with Martin, but what are some of the good frameworks that you would recommend to liberate creativity?
Yeah, well, they call them thinking frameworks. I mean, I think they're at their best when we call them thinking frameworks. When they're frameworks, they're like a game. They're like a game. And they provoke you to think, and they provoke you to question, and they provoke you to be curious. And when they're doing that, they're absolutely, it's like carbohydrates for your imagination or something. It's just absolutely. The problem is there's a shelf life to them. And so models that we had been using for a few years in the beginning to cultivate, like any organization has a brand, like Unilever has their brand key, I don't know what Reckitt has, P&G I'm sure has, we have the brand heart, everyone's got some sort of, and they're all swimming in the same soup, and they all have some sort of consumer insight or human truth, some sort of category disruption, there's likely something about the product narrative, some tonal voice, maybe your archetype, whatever it is, it's all in there. The moment people acclimate themselves to these, they become problematic. Because the moment you're acclimated to it, you're just checking the boxes. And you're doing it we've all been in those meetings before where you're wordsmithing and you're like, I don't even know why we spent 4 hours wordsmithing, whether it's, joy or fun, and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And the agency's going and they're going, well, at least we're getting our retainer fee out of this. And it's not working. And that's when they become problematic. But so there's almost like, I was married once before, so I knew, like, I felt the need to confess that, but I did. My ex-wife used to have like a round robin of exercise tapes in the house. Like she had like Buns of Steel, and then it would be like workout karate or whatever. And I asked her, why don't you just stick with one? And she's like, because they burn out. And I think so it goes with these tools. There's some foundational principles that you never want to walk away from. I agree to that. But the tools themselves become atrophy after a certain amount of tenure within the organization.
So we didn't talk about this, but what are the foundational principles that you adhere to?
Well, that whole Copernican shift narrative, I remember I learned it in the first year of being a brand builder, and it has stuck with me forever, that I don't know enough about history, I'm not that smart a fella, but Copernicus, he was this, and then everyone hung him from his short hairs because he said, no, heliocentric universe, we're not the center of the universe. actually the sun is the center of the universe, and the scientists were like, well, you're batshit crazy because I can go out every morning and see that the sun clearly, and that's a wonderful example of how the scientific method can be used every single morning to prove in no uncertain terms that the sun revolves around the earth, and yet you'd be wrong because you're looking from the wrong perspective. And so it goes with marketers, and I'm sure you're like, help me make a leap on that one, Zach. So, brands typically behave in a manner consistent with them being the center of the universe. And we all give lip service to knowing that we're not. We sell Sensodyne, it's an amazing billion-dollar business. We are definitely not the center. So the more you can behave in a manner consistent with the user, the person, the culture, the human, the condition, etc., being the center of the universe, and us being merely one small planet that revolves around them, that to me is a foundational principle of brand building, because it is the elemental shift between compassion and empathy and selflessness and death of ego, and it depends on whether we're on the LSD panel or not. Okay, I will skip the death of ego, then redact it. But getting them out of themselves and getting marketers to see the world through the lens of the consumer. You can't beat that one. It's a fundamental principle.
So there's two really interesting things there. So from a technology perspective, we are shifting from what is Web 2 to Web 3. And part of the principle to Web 3 is the consumer is at the center of your ecosystem. And they own that data. And to hear you say that, marketers have to think more about your audience being at the center versus you. It's really interesting because it aligns really well with technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving forward, I think just to kind of close on the topic of frameworks, one of the things that I really thought of, and maybe this applies to you guys, but to me, after talking to Zach last night, a framework is literally like building an IKEA piece of furniture, right?
Yeah.
The framework is that manual. Once you're done with the manual, toss it in the fire because you're just sick and tired of it. Do not bring it back up.
Yeah.
And so too many of us hold that manual in front of us over and over and over, and there's really not much more you can do with that IKEA furniture or whatever ad you're trying to build.
Absolutely. Well, it's, I don't know how much spirituality has its place in corporate America. People freak out but there is a spiritual axiom that once you have the fish, you don't need the trap. The trap is a trap, and if you're beholden to the trap, you're beholden to the trap. What we found time and time again, in fact, Ed Catmull, to invoke him again, has a famous quote, you can go look it up right now, where he goes, you give a mediocre script to a great team, you'll end up with a great movie. You give a great script to a mediocre team, you're going to end up with a mediocre movie. And it's harsh. Who wants to think that they're on a mediocre team? And I'm not even convinced there are such things as mediocre teams. I think all teams can be excellent as long as addition by subtraction, as long as you remove the invisible obstacles to them being great. So what you find when you're working in creative transformation, or in my case, brand building, or using brand building as a method for creative transformation, is that you're not so much concerned about the page. I mean, I have driven to a number of wonderful pages where you can present, and this is our brand strategy, check it out, leaf through the brand book, all the distinctive assets and memories, they're all there. But you check back in 3 months later and they're just stuck. Then they're on the 10th round with their agency, you look at the brief and you're like, well, where did this go? I literally codified, I called it the leaky bucket syndrome. Because they fill the bucket with all this ambition, all this incredible, like, we're going to go do this, and this is the human truth, and we're going to intervene with them, and we're a part of their story, and we're going to da-da-da. And then they slowly hand the bucket down the table of alignment. First it goes to the leadership, and leadership goes, because I've never met a dog that thinks a yard is his until he pees on the fence, right? So this is, everyone's got to pee on it a little bit. And so everyone, and then it goes down the alignment phase, or maybe even more tastefully, it's like this beautifully shaped, very distinctive object. And as this distinctive object rolls down the table of alignment, it gets touched by everybody, and by the end, it's a perfect sphere. Perfect in every way and completely invisible in the marketplace. So what you find is the work you're really doing is with the team to cultivate conviction and frankly, the tenacity to say, no, I don't want your alignment feedback. We know what we're doing, and this is it. And if you don't do that, you get a sphere.
So I think you're basically heading into this process of creative transformation, right? We talked about this last night, an 18 process, 18 month to 5 year process, right? Most leaders don't want to hear, oh my gosh, it's going to take us 5 years to go through this. It's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Talk to us about some of the phases that you've seen in that 18-month to 5-year process for creative transformation.
Well, who knows how long it takes. All I know is that you can't grow a tree. There's no way to speed a tree up. You plant a tree, the tree is, you know what I mean? There's an ancient sort of awesome quote that was like, the best time to plant a tree is now. The second best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Or no, the second best time to plant a tree is now. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Because it takes time. So I don't know from 18 months to 5 years. I can tell you what I saw at Mondelez. I can tell you what I saw at Haleon. AB InBev, Molson Coors, but AB InBev has an enviable transformation story to tell. And none of them happen fast. You can run a pilot fast. You can go take one branch of the organization and push it really fast. But in terms of bringing the whole battleship with you, it takes time. Now, you asked about the phases.
What do you look for? Like, what are some of the success signs?
So a lot of times, like if you look at Gallup poll right now, and we're in an engagement crisis. It's people, the Great Resignation, and people are sort of disengaged from their jobs, and holding up the illusion of the matrix is not. It's a full-time job, and it's very difficult for people. So a lot of people are dropping out and saying, "Fuck it, I'm going to go start a farm and just." But some people are staying in. So what you have here is people who have lost touch with, what's going on, and if they've lost touch with what's going on in their career and what they're doing, and they're kind of like, well, I got a mortgage and I'm gonna, then you're essentially, if you can visualize this perverse metaphor, everyone's a pie chart and you're utilizing like a sliver of their totality, using a sliver, a percentage of their creative, shakti, of their creative energy, you're using a sliver of their engagement, of their intelligence. So the first thing you want to look out for, phase one, is that you fire a shot heard across the organization, whether that's hiring a new leader or a new program or saying flushing the old, we're going to start with a new framework for whatever. Somehow you let everyone know, or you have like an internal TED Talk thing, which is what we did at Haleon, bringing in the outside in. You let people know change is coming. The first beacon of measurement is usually the engagement survey, like I was saying, where you start to see people go, I'm more, and what you kind of want to see is you kind of want to see scores drop initially, and I'll tell you why. People have a false sense of acumen when you first ask them, are you a good brand builder? How are you at writing briefs? How are you at delivering briefs? How do you feel like the creative is, et cetera, et cetera. They'll tell you, I'm a B+, I'm an A-, I'm a B+. And then you start to show them what great looks like, and they go, shit, I got some work to do. Yeah, we're not that good yet. So you'll see an initial dip, but what you want to see is engagement scores going up. That's in the first 18 months. Because people are starting to go, hallelujah, we're changing, we're growing. And I continue to believe, I don't have any empirical evidence to support this, but I continue to believe that organizations grow in direct proportion to the people within that organization's growth. That if personal growth and professional growth are a priority, and each individual, thousands of people, are on their own personal growth trajectory, that you can't help but have that aggregate to organizational growth. So that's the first stage. You're working, like Ed Catmull's invisible, you're working in the invisible. You're not going to see it in programs, you're not going to see it in the marketplace. You can maybe fund a pilot and get something out there fast to drive some organizational envy, which can be really healthy because everyone in the rest of the organization goes, what are they doing over there? They're winning awards, and then it raises the bar. But really, I think you're working in the invisible at first. That's the first phase.
Is there a second?
Well, you're going to laugh because I have a love-hate relationship with the second phase, but I think the second phase is codification. So your frameworks and you have to have it right. What's the new brief look like? How do we look at brand? Do we love storytelling? What's the relationship between science? What about comms planning? How do we play with all these new flavors like TikTok? So once you codify that, you're essentially evoking a philosophy where everyone can look at it and hopefully love it, and then everyone's speaking the same language. We have a shared lexicon, and it creates culture. It creates a culture. So I think that's the second phase.
So it's really ironic, right? Because that second phase relies on people being great teachers, right? Like being able to teach frameworks, being able to be repetitioners, right? Repeating themselves over and over and over, so people really get that message. So as the son of a teacher, coming back to your dad, what are some of the principles that you would give to the audience about being a great teacher to actually go through that second phase? Because that's one of the ones that we all get stuck in, right? Because we're like, oh, we have a framework, perfect, we're great.
Yeah.
But that's only phase 2.
Yeah. It's actually, it's interesting that you mentioned, so the notion of capabilities comes up very naturally, because now capabilities is the word that we use, it's essentially corporate for teachers, right? And if you follow the AB InBev story, and they won Marketer of the Year, and that whole, they had a really nice narrative, you can't deny it. One of the women who was instrumental in that, and I think her name was Lori, or something, unfortunately she came to an untimely early death, but she was incredible at what she did. She worked hand in hand with the CMO and was sure that the department would not be called capabilities, but it would be called capabilities and culture. So that's the first, before we talk about what makes a great teacher and how to do peer-to-peer and swarm theory where people are teaching each other and stuff. The first thing is someone's got to be watching over culture. And it's usually not corporate comms, because they're usually concerned with how to relate to the outside world. So to have capabilities and culture collapsed into the same department, such that, yeah, we're teaching and we have capability interventions, multimodality, you can learn on your phone, you can learn in seminars, you can learn from each other, fine, sure, but someone's got to be building culture. Because culture is the operating system. And if you ever try to upload an app on your phone where they're like, you need to update your operating system, that's a lot of what goes on. You try to upload a new creative brief, and it's a great creative brief, but culture eats strategy. That's been around forever and a half, right? So if you don't have the culture, if it's not updated, you're out to lunch when you try to upload like a new brief or a new creative evaluation protocol or whatever the case might be. So the first thing is update your operating system, which is get your culture online, phase 1. But then in terms of being a teacher, I'm doing. That would be my secret, doing. And that's what my father did. So I did not grow up as a capability builder, but I have been in that role now for a long time, and so sort of an outsider to that world. And I'm prejudicial. I do not find classrooms to be, and you can hear from England. In England, they call them sheep dip. They used to just take these sheep, and to get ticks off of them, they would like carve a hole in the ground, and they would just run them through the sheep dip, and that's what these capability interventions feel like sometimes. The sheep dip, you're just taking, 150 people, and you're showing a bunch of, and what do you got? 6 months later, you tune in, no one remembers what you taught them, no one's practicing it. So small scale coaching, small pilots, doing, facilitating. That's how we've always done it. I'm always at the front of the room with paper, pen, Post-its, facilitating. The classroom thing maybe can work for large scale, we're doing this with digital commerce and we want you all to know it, more for like just information, nice to know stuff. But in terms of really building capabilities and driving change, I think you got to be boots on the ground, markers in the hand, working on it with their brands live, not simulated brands.
That's awesome. So just a couple more seconds here, so we have employee surveys, be patient with the dip, right? Combine capability and culture. So you basically have people that are indoctrinated into the brand. And then we have the power of do, right? Just do it. Just go in and do it. Facilitate and do it, right? Be a great teacher. The one piece we didn't talk about is unlocking imagination and the challenge that frameworks basically play or do against that power of imagination.
Yeah.
So how do you unlock imagination? Then we'll go to like the final phase, which is the better briefs, the awards, the winning piece.
Yeah, unlocking imagination. I think when you get into that territory, you're joining the likes of poets, muses, sages, shaman, medicine women for the past 4,000 years. Okay? Nobody knows how that's, you're summoning the muse. Your guess is as good as mine. Nobody knows, why do bands have a great album and then they can't make another one? Like, you're sort of like, well, I don't know what happened. Why were the Beatles able to consistently do it? So I don't know, it's a great mystery, and I think it's a mystery worth, because there's dollar signs associated with it. We know that there are. We know, this is Google's famous statistic, 70% of your ROI is the quality of your creative. The other 30% is the media. Don't worry so much about it. Get the media right, for sure, but our investment is splintered. It's like 70% of our intellectual and financial investment is on the media, 30% on the creative. Well, that's clearly not, so however right they are, I do not know. But liberating that 70% to be more effective for us, again, I continue to believe it's there, it's pre-existing, it's in your organization. We're only harnessing a very small sliver of each person's creative potential, and I think it's about removing obstacles. Frankly, I think the number one, it won't surprise you from an archetypal perspective, but I think the number one obstacle is fear. People show up to their jobs and they put on this suit that they call marketer, and they leave their humanity, all the things that are very intuitive and natural to them as human beings that they would just intuitively know in their home or in their life. They zip it off and they zip on their marketer, and all of a sudden now you're talking to a marketer. The degree to which we can allow and create a safe space for people to just be human in the workplace and shed that sort of marketing pretense, I think is the degree to which you will capture at least a degree more of their liberated creative self. Let them play. Let them have some space and some fun. And a lot of that comes from leadership. If you have stinkers up there at the C-suite, there's no way. It's just not going to, like you can't, I would expect you guys to make culture. Well, that's a nice thing to say. Culture comes from the bottom. Yes and no. If you've got people up there that are putting pressure on P&L and not being playful at all, it's going to be really hard for people beneath them to be playful. So I think removing fear and creating an environment where people feel safe, experimenting and being playful. I don't think that answer surprises you, though. I think that's what we're all trying to get to. Who can make the leap, though? What organizations have found a way to make the leap?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me only because the best education systems in the world for young kids are known to succeed because they teach kids how to play.
Yeah, well, my sister runs a camp. She lives in Israel, and she started Israel's first camp called Creative Consciousness. She's traveling all over the country right now speaking about how to create conscious with kids. To avoid this conditioning, anyway, that's a whole other monologue, but to avoid the conditioning that limits them as opposed to broadens them. And it's incredible. It's incredible.
That's awesome. Well, if anybody wants to have incredible conversations, Zach is the person to do it. We talked about teachers, acid trips, the metamorphosis. We talked about that.
We didn't hit the
Oh, that's right. We didn't think, but it's. I mean, our conversation.
Caterpillar becomes liquid before it becomes.
Yeah, we were going to talk about that. We didn't have time, but any final comments, thoughts that you wanted to share with the audience?
No, I'm leaving Haleon, so if there's anyone from Coors out there and you're looking for some creative transformation, I have a resume and I'd be happy to. I'm also considering going back to the agency side, so if anyone is.
Are you a published author? Do you have a book with all these thoughts?
I definitely don't, but I have a few records out. I was in a punk band that I was in.
There you go. Well, maybe you should write a book and you'll
Yeah, oh, yeah, very kind of you. It's very sweet.
Thanks, man. This is awesome.
Oh, what a pleasure.
Thank you.